Oh, you're good. All right. Welcome everybody. Going to our discussion tonight, which is going to be Roundtable V.A.C's Roundtable number 32, the Bud Burden Cannabis Econ 101. And um, it's basically a discussion that has centered around the reality that many of our veterans are on fixed incomes, and the reality of the cost of cannabis, no matter where we are, especially in legal environments, is, um, well, the price of the pot is too damn high. That's the reality of what we're dealing with here. And because of that, we have to deal with, whether we have the medicine that we need or pay the price, or if you happen to be in one of the few states that allow for, you can grow your own, which I can do in California, but in other states, that's not necessarily the reality that they're left with. So tonight we wanted to focus around, the costs of cannabis. We know that it is not necessarily cheap to grow, but we know that it's also not very expensive to grow on top of that. So we're kind of going to be discussing some ideas around questions. It's kind of an organic conversation, but we do have some questions that we want to throw out to the council people. So, what do you pay in an authorized dispensary for store-bought cannabis where you are? So, some of us here have availability to have that, whereas some of us, of course, are. Michael is in an area in Virginia where they're still burgeoning with their industry, whereas um, Tony is in a state of Louisiana that allows for medical use, but of course, it is only through a very few distributors, actually currently two, but I do believe, Tony, you could probably enlighten on us, and if it's going to be expanding into more than that. However, here in California, I can travel to quite a few numerous large cities and get choice and access. I know that Council Member Armstrong in Pennsylvania has access in stores and for patients, and Pearson in Alaska has access to adult use as well as to medical cannabis. So I'll kind of start off with you, Pearson, up in Alaska, since you're in another legal state that sells both medical and adult use. What on average are y'all paying up there for mid to high grade cannabis there in Alaska? And we'll just kind of, I guess, center around flower initially.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like some of you know, I was at a comedy show at the local cannabis consumption um, cafe yesterday, and I think I paid uh, $8 for a pre-roll, a gram pre-roll, which is pretty much the high end of I think it was the most expensive joint that a pre-roll that I could purchase. You know, super high roller here. But typically you're looking at 15-20 bucks a gram, upwards to, I mean, depending on, so we're really THC based on sales, and so from cultivation to retail to consumer, really is based off of the THC content, which I'm not going to get into my objections to that, but you're looking at an ounce costing upwards of $500 to the consumer. But I can walk into probably 100 plus stores right now if I decided to hop on a plane to get to them, and buy pre-rolls that are 2 for $5, or $5 joints that are already ready to go in a tube, or get flour in a sack per se, for, I would say, traditional market prices. Where me growing up in Philadelphia, $20 gram, $60 eighth type thing, which is, tough for a lot of people. It's tough for me to justify that expenditure, but it's a necessity that I have to address. So.
All right, let's go to Pennsylvania and Councilmember Armstrong. What are you paying there?
So Pennsylvania is a medical state, first off. We pay in the dispensary right now, we pay $55 to $65, I would say, for mid to high level. That's basically the price you can get if you're lucky enough to find quarters, which for some reason they only sell in our program. They've never sold anything more than a quarter. If you're lucky enough to find a quarter of the strain you want from the grower you want, sometimes you can find that for $90 a quarter. But that basically, it's basically between $440 and $520 an ounce for patients in the state of Pennsylvania, which seems high, seeing we only have a 5% tax, but we'll get into that a little later on. So yeah, it's expensive. And what I would say to people who say that, that's reasonable compared to other prices, is that this is daily medicine for many, many patients. It's not something that they use as adult use or recreational. They have to have their medicine every day. So the costs add up exponentially when you're talking about the need to have something every day, as opposed to using it a few times a week in the adult use market.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Landry, you come from Arizona, but of course, I think you're currently residing in the state of Louisiana. So you've, of course, gone from one state where you had actually adult legal access to a state that is strictly kind of a closed loop medical. And I know you're working actively in the state there. So what is a patient is paying for in the state of Louisiana compared to what they were paying in the state of Arizona?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you again. I can really speak to Arizona's prices more so than Louisiana, because unfortunately I stand in solidarity with a lot of veterans who can't afford to access. Some doctors in Louisiana are requiring an initial visit with a $200 recommendation, and we're talking veterans with lifelong physical and mental conditions that every year they're having to pay the $200 fee to get access to the cannabis. And we only have 9 dispensaries with 4.5 million people. So some patients would have to drive across two counties. In Louisiana, we have parishes. So they would have to make an hour one-way trip or so to get to a dispensary, which down here we have them at pharmacies. Cannabis is not a pharmaceutical drug, but the way our program was set up, we only allow pharmacists to dispense the cannabis. So there's a lot of costs that get put into our program that is unnecessary. And right now we only have 2 growers, and so the price, it's a very secretive program. You can't get online and look up. I just tried to get some real-time data on pricing over here that I could give to you in Louisiana. But if you go to their website, the dispensary's website, it's blocked. If you, unless you're a patient, you can't see how much they would charge for the cannabis. So in the past, patients have testified with alongside me at the Capitol that they would have to pay like $1,000 to $1,400 a month for their medicine, you know, with their ailments and the amount of cannabis that they use. That's what they'd have to pay, and that's on top of the, you know, $200 a year. Some doctors want to do tests every 3 months. If you're a cannabis patient, you got to go back to your doctor every 3 months. So it's just astronomical cost and very prohibitive. It's not you know, a true medical program. It's been deemed essential medicine by our governor. A true medical program, there would be some mechanism in place to make sure that this was accessible, and it's not, ATN. It's just no other way to put it. The pricing and the distance to the dispensaries, you know, it's just so prohibitive. You know, if you're lower income, it just can't. People can't afford it right now. So most of the patients I get feedback from, they've gotten the initial recommendation, and they're going to the street and getting it through the you know, the underground market. Unfortunately, and it's untested. You know, it could be filled with all kind of, you know, pesticide or mold, mildew, what have you. It's untested, so it's just bad all around. You know, on the health effects. They already suffering from some health ailments, and then they got to go to the street and get it, and maybe going to have some long-term respiratory or some other problems develop from using untested cannabis. So that's about all I can add for Louisiana's program. We're hoping to expand the medical program this year and get some more growers and more dispensaries, and possibly home grow. I'm monitoring the bills at the legislature. Our legislative session opens on March 14th, so just a couple weeks now. And the bills, the pre-filed bills, are flowing in every day. Watching and posting in Louisiana Veterans for Medical Cannabis, but the pricing is right now is just too prohibitive for many patients.
Right on. Well, not right on. I mean, it really sucks. But thank you for your update there. Next, we're going to go to the state of Virginia with Council Member Crowitz, which he doesn't know what the cost of medical or legal adult use will be yet. However, I think he has some idea of some international prices from Canada and the Netherlands to give us some over-the-counter costs there. So take it away, Michael.
Thanks, Etienne. So before I get into, I think I will talk a little bit about Virginia. There's a little bit to say, but before I get into that, let me talk a little bit about international. To kind of go back to the beginning, I really stumbled into the program over there in Netherlands, in Holland, the Dutch medical cannabis program. I became injured in the Air Force right at the time that I was getting ready to go on this huge trip of Asia. It was like this trip of a lifetime that took me months and months and months to plan. It was one of these things where I actually changed my port of call, you know, for the military folks out there, they know what I'm talking about. And I actually had duty. I was on duty papers. I was actually flying on military orders. I wouldn't get bumped by the general's luggage or whatever, and I'd be able to fly to Korea or this or that. And that's actually when I chose to have my freaking accident and get all injured in Guam. So I never got to do that, and I replaced that by going to Holland. And this was like right around 1996, and medical marijuana in the United States was just getting going. Prop 215 was just being passed, but the Dutch already had a medical marijuana program in play at that time. There was a company called Mary Farm in Rotterdam, and you get these containers. They were like 28-gram containers of cannabis, and it was relatively cheap. You know, at the time, it was just a few dollars a gram, and it was relatively good. I actually, in subsequent trips to Europe over time, wound up participating in almost every new program that they came out with in Holland vicariously, just again, coincidentally. The timing just happened to be right. And the Dutch shut down that program. I actually got a letter from the Dutch Minister of Health saying that you can't get your cannabis from the pharmacy right now because we're revamping the program. And what they did was they set up growers that had contract to grow for the government. Bedrocan, that a lot of people know today. I just did the price. Their current price is showing €5.50 per gram is what the patients are paying right now for the cannabis in the pharmacy from Bedrocan over in the Netherlands. And they get that by prescription. You go into your doctor, you get a prescription, you fill it at the pharmacy. And if you are lucky enough to be in sort of a city or somewhere where they carry it, you don't even have to wait for it to be ordered. It's right there on the pharmacy shelf. That's cannabis in the civilized world. So anyway, one of the other, I'll just make a note that one of the other growers for the Dutch program was a military veteran running a company called Stichting, Marijuana Stichting, I think is what he called it, James Burton. And hopefully we'll be able to get him on the call. Al has been trying to get him to come on as a military vet, expat from the US who worked in that program over in the Netherlands. So that would be really interesting. We'll get him on the line. But I went ahead and looked up the price also while I was at it in Canada on Tilray company. And they showed something on their website that their price is right about $4.50 Canadian, which is about $3.50 US. And that they said represented like a 37% increase during 2020. So that's interesting. I actually have a lot of choices these days in Virginia. It's amazing. It's now legal to possess in Virginia and legal to grow. And we have a medical cannabis program. In Virginia, you have to get a recommendation on a special certificate that they have in the state. And then you get a card from the state, and then you can go shop at one of the shops. There's only about 6 in the whole state. The closest one to me is about an hour and a half. So you might say I'm still transitioning over from the traditional markets personally. But once you have the documentation in the Virginia program, you can actually go purchase cannabis in the stores in Washington, D.C., and I believe Maryland as well. And DC reciprocates like only with us. So it's a very cool reciprocating program. We can buy the cannabis in their registered dispensaries as well up in Washington, DC. The price, I won't say much about price. I'll let others say, what they know about from their own dispensaries. But I will say this, that it's remarkably stable. When I talk to veterans around the country, I get very, very similar results from what they're saying they need. There's kind of 2 groupings, it seems like. There's the grouping that seems to come in and around 1 gram of high quality flower a day. And then there's the grouping that comes between like 2.5 to 5 grams per day. And then, it's a little harder to gradient that out to what we have with extracts now. I can't really do that. But with the flower, yeah, it's most people, and that would equate to like 1 full-size cigarette, 1 full-size joint per day is actually a typical amount of cannabis that many medicinal users are able to get their medical benefit from. So I fall into that category. If I were to get a good quality ounce and a half of the best quality bud, that easily lasts me a month. So, that kind of works it out for you.
No, thank you for that breakdown. That's that's key to understanding. Last, I think, is the state of California, which Brian and I live in Northern California, and Brian in Southern California. But he actually manufactures and sells cannabis to retail and medical outlets. So, what do y'all see down there in Southern California, Brian?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that all of us noticed in California was the price of flower just dropping from wholesalers just due to wage-made producers and not enough dispensaries. Really with us, I would say, for a gram of flower, you're probably looking anywhere between 9 to 20. I've seen it. I've seen things with eighths between 30 to $60. We try to meet the market where we know it can be productive for people who need it. So, for example, we've sent we'll do like pre-rolls and stuff like that where literally it costs about $3 for us to get out the door. Or we'll sell to the wholesaler for $3. And sorry, I got a crowd here. But sometimes retailers might jack it up. I mean, we recommend, hey, go $6. They might go up to, some go 7, some go up to 17, and people are still buying it, which was kind of bizarre to me. But I think the really main thing is like at ATN, I think it's going to give a great deep dive on California. So I won't take too much time just with his knowledge. But again, when we hit the tax part, that's when things really get interesting, especially out here in California, of what that does.
Right on. Well, I guess that's for me. Looking at because I am a retailer, I see the retail end of price. So we carry anything from grams from $10 all the way up to $70 eighths. So it's depending on the quality, it's depending on the age, it's depending on the distributor and various other parts. But referencing the Oxford Treatment Center has put out a great breakdown on the average cost of cannabis. It breaks down all 50 states with on average for high quality cannabis in California around $257. Now I know, and Brian can attest that since that has been printed, the price has gone down and will continue to go down. So I would be interested to see what that revisement is. However, if you look in Washington, D.C., where it is actually legal, the cost is $598 for an ounce. So, of course, this is from 2020, but at the same time, it just gives you an understanding about what the kind of, prices of cannabis are from what it actually costs to produce it, as we know, is a lot different than what it actually costs to, bring it to market, because there's a lot of things that involve around bringing it to market. So I see a lot of high quality cannabis for a lower price. I think that Oregon does the same, but at the same time, we're both dealing with gluts within our states, so we're kind of seeing where things shake out, because the there's still outdoor from last year, and it's a lot, and there was already more from the previous year. So the average cost of everything has gone up on top of that, from transportation costs to gas costs. We have to incur, and we incur all those costs. So people wonder, what does and why does my cannabis cost so much? So I broke it down a little bit. This isn't everything, but this gives you an understanding about what we retailers have to pay here in California. We have to pay yearly taxes and quarterly taxes, both local and regional. We have distributors tax that we pay. We have a transportation tax, the cost of transportation, lab testing, which of course is passed on to us, even though it's done by the distributors and the wholesalers, we still pay for it in the end. City taxes, which of course is its whole other situation, depending on municipality that you're in. There's some that are 0. Mine, it was 10%. Now they've lowered it to 5. We were trying to get it lowered to 2.5. There's of course lawyers, insurance, various types like health insurance, 401ks, armored cars, because we have to transport money, because we can't actually use banks, etc. So security systems, security monitoring, cleaning, stocking, maintenance, plumbing, electric, displays. There's an actual company that comes, and we have to pay to destroy the display cannabis in California, because whereas in the past I could sell that to somebody, or an employee could buy it for a discount, it has to be physically logged and destroyed. So there is an actual company that you pay to do that. Then, of course, there's HR fees for, your human resources, because you have to pay your employees, which is another part of that, and of course that requires check fees, because there's a company that has to pay checks to your employees, because you can't do it through a bank. And then, of course, then if you do have a bank, then there's banking fees, which are specific and high. And of course, we pay for discounts and samples that we give to employees, veterans, as well as we also give away free cannabis to over 250 plus people a week. So, you can see where your money goes, and it goes all over the place. So people wonder, well, why is it so different compared to my local plug? Well, that's an idea of why, because, your local dealer, which I started off in college. I was your your local neighborhood dealer. And the cost was all on me. I was the manufacturer distributor. I packaged it on the spot. I also weighed it. I didn't do the lab testing, I did self-testing. So there was different aspects of what I had to deal with, and where people wonder, well, what happened. Well, that's an idea of some of what's actually happens, what transpires, and what we pay. And of course, growers have pay different realities, from nutrients to everything that they have to get going, from lights, etc., to maintenance, to pumps, and all the realities that come with that. And all those costs in the end all float upstream, so they fall on you. And then, of course, then you add on the over-the-counter taxes that counties have, which is 9.25 here in Alameda County. And then you add on the 15% tax that the state of California now adds to a retail sale. Then add on again that 5% local tax. And now you're looking at a 30 plus percent taxation, 34 to 36% in some areas, taxation on your cannabis at the retail end. So a lot of money going some places, but not necessarily ending up in a lot of the workers, farmers, and retailers' hands, is a reality that we have found through to the overtaxation. I saw Spark put out a breakdown of $50,000 in sales for wholesale cannabis, and 40,000 of it went in taxes. So that gives you an understanding of some of the realities that give pause to people who think they want to get into the game, or those that have been in the game. I know more that are trying to figure out how to get out now than necessarily how to get in, because of the realities of the costs, inflations from every aspect of the game. So we're looking for a little help here. And of course, the Fed is talking, they want to come and make it legal, but if they do so, they want a 25% tax on top of that. So there in California, you would immediately have a 55 to 60% tax rate immediately, potentially, on products out the door, which would be the death knell to the industry in itself. Because as we know, there is the terminology that we grew up on was known as black market, because of becoming further educated on nomenclature, and being aware of the racism tied to that. We tend to use the term traditional market. So I came up amongst the traditional market, and so I know what the costs are. So we're going to kind of bounce around and talk about what does it cost on the traditional market. So Michael, you're the resident expert kind of in this fair, being that you're in a state that is transitioning. And Tony, maybe you have some insight here as well as to what are the on the street costs that people have to pay, because they cannot afford to be in the systems. So they have to, risk taking chances on people's places, quality, and hope that they're getting what they need, which sometimes is met, but consistently can be a problem. So, Councilmember Krawitz, what are your thoughts?
Well, the street can be a rough place and it seems to be getting rougher by the minute. And I don't say that lightly, having kind of really been in love with the streets as a kid. I grew up in a little town right outside of New York City, in suburbia, white picket fences and all, but just a couple miles in each direction was just wildly different environments. And you go down to the city, there were actually little storefronts where you could buy marijuana illegally, but sort of constructively. And the drug war came in, and Ed Koch came in, and they brought in the National Guard, and they wiped all that out for sure. And what it seemed to happen was the marijuana disappeared, and on the same street corners, dealers came back, but they came back selling crack. And that just seems to be sort of the way of the West, with drugs on the street. When the police come in and wipe something out, it never gets replaced with something less dangerous or in some way less addicting. And it's just sort of an axiom of the streets. But the cost of cannabis, it's another thing that I find fascinating, and that most people, I don't really think, fully grasp the push-pull that happens in our world from prohibition. The things that we would or would not be doing if it weren't for prohibition. Growing indoors under lights, smoking marijuana. These are actually things that are byproducts of the drug war. The behaviors that were taught to us by necessity to survive the drug war. And even now, as we're morphing into more and more states that have legal cannabis sales, regulated adult sales, we're still being very strongly manipulated by these forces that are criminal enterprises, big ones that ship cannabis not in bags or backpacks. The cannabis that you and I loved in the 70s came in on somebody's backpack, while they were off at school, and they went down there and they got a couple of duffel bags of weed or whatever. That was a lot of the cannabis that I fell in love with as a kid. The Hawaiian Rainbow and the Colombian Gold and stuff like that. These guys are shipping semi trucks full of weed, compressed, and doing so with impunity today. But there's no market for that stuff. If you go into a state that has legal regulated adult sales, there is almost none of that imported low level bud. There's literally no market for it. And I think now, what they're trying to do to offset that is get more involved in either cultivation under the color legalization, in other words, having massive illegal grows in the big forests and stuff like that, knowing that there's less enforcement under legalization, and then selling it in places like Virginia. So we're getting in Virginia, like, either the cast-offs of the legal sales, the stuff that rolled off the shelf, the stuff that wasn't very popular. We're getting the stuff that's grown illegally by massive grows out in the forest, or we're still getting, big trailer truck weed. The trailer truck weed, you're talking about $45 for a quarter ounce, and that's pretty stable still, many years, $40, $50 for a quarter ounce, $90 to $100, something like that, for an ounce, maybe $150 for an ounce if it was a little bit better quality. And still a lot of people buy that, not in any legal states, but in the illegal states. And then, the commercial bud, again, we were talking about this on the side, but I think one of the greatest problems we face today are counterfeits. And if you go into a regulated adult market outlet that actually is complying with state laws, and you can see that evidence of that compliance in many to most cases, maybe even most to almost all cases, you're in pretty good shape. You're buying what you think you're buying. You're getting what is as advertised. But they're actually selling the packaging from some of the more reputable brands of cannabis products. You can go in the dark web and buy that packaging for like bulk prices, and then fill it yourself in your basement somewhere. And that's what I'm afraid you might be getting on the street in Virginia, is somebody's version of a vape pen from California, or somebody's version of other, name brand products. And then finally, this is just happening everywhere. And I actually think we probably face less of a problem with cannabis than with other drugs. ironically, even legal drugs, is fentanyl. And these really, really, really dangerous super drugs that are so small, they're like LSD in size. You're talking microgram doses, and yet you can overdose and die on an amount that you can't even see. What would be equivalent of a grain or two of salt is enough to kill you. So having that into a product, and one case that was on the videos I was just watching the other day and the mainstream documentaries was this young lady who her doctor had cut her off from her prescription for Xanax when she went to college, I guess, facing the reality that as she was getting older, it might be abused. So she's facing some tests. She's anxious. She went and bought a few these tabs of these anxiety pills on the street, and they were found counterfeit. They were compressed fentanyl, and died of an overdose. So this is a tragedy unfolding in our world that unfortunately cannabis is not immune from. And not that long ago, we had a spate of deaths from just a bad idea in the dark web of using vitamin E acetate as a thinner for the cannabis products. And that is just generally a horrifying idea, to have that stuff in your, any kind of mineral oil evidently doesn't vaporize well, sticks in your lungs and kills you. So we had a spate of actual deaths from cannabis products. So these are all these kind of cautionary tales, but in the end of the day, the price, I'll say one more thing, and it wraps up all the thing about price on the street. And that is the price in the markets of the regulated adult sales are still tied to the illegal market price. And they have to be, because if they're not, then it puts them in a very uncomfortable position with respect to diversion across state lines. What we're going to see undoubtedly when we actually finally have national legalization is a drop in price just from crossing state lines. Then another drop in price once we actually can have people grow cannabis near the equator where they get super high quality cannabis without any augmented lights, without the high energy and less cost for labor as well. So the cost of cannabis is going to come down. It's going to come down again. It's going to come down again. But for now, it's still relatively stable and still based on the drug war pricing, the prohibition pricing. You're looking at $300 to $500 an ounce, maybe $250 for an ounce if you get a friend deal for good bud, high quality, medicinal grade. And like I like to say on the street, you get two kinds of bud. In the dispensary, you get 8 choices, all kinds of different varietals and product lines and stuff. On the street, you get 2 choices, the good weed and the bad weed. I'll leave you with that thought.
Yes, and sometimes you just have either the choice of the bad weed or no weed. And that sums
Ouch.
up my college years. Councilmember Landry, what's the going rate on the sidelines there? If you were able to give any perspective from Arizona or Louisiana for that matter.
Yeah, there again, as far as the illicit market, ATN, I've pretty much given up on that. That was one of the reasons I moved to Arizona. I thought maybe, repeatedly, again and again, got paid like $300 for an ounce of cannabis in the illicit market here in Louisiana, and I'd try it, get it home. Of course, there's no refund on it if you get it home and you're feeling some just something's not right. It's something that's just like something was put in it. I really think that eventually it became something intentionally somebody was doing. When you have a mouth like mine that you stick your neck out for this advocate work, like very few people do. There's 4.5 million people in Louisiana, and I've been at the state capitol on nearly every cannabis bill that they had to offer over there. And here recently I went, and there was supposed to be patient testimony. And here I'm not even a patient in Louisiana's medical cannabis program, but I drove the 2-hour round trip to go to the Capitol to testify for patients and patient access and the quality of cannabis they're getting here at dispensaries, very substandard for medical cannabis. and nobody was there. They had one guy there. He said he was from Washington State. I don't know what up with that, but yeah, getting the cannabis on the illicit market, like Michael was saying, the cartels used to bring it across the border. They had high seizures at the border. Now, most of the seizures is fentanyl. They're getting at the border, and the cannabis that is coming across, they're processing it in Mexico into concentrate, and it's coming across for these vape pens and stuff, and it's full of pesticides and all kind of things. And just like Michael was saying with the pills, the compressing the machines that make the pills, they make them so realistic to the actual pharmaceutical pills that you can't tell the difference with a naked eye. And the same thing with the vape pens. People are buying them on the street. It might have a name brand on it, but you don't know what's really inside of it. So it's very, very, dicey kind of work to get that stuff on the street. And the main obstacle is the federal law. If the federal law would fall in line with the FDA has approved Epidiolex and Sativex for use as cannabis derived, and they still claiming that cannabis has no medicinal value, that lots of pharmaceutical drugs are safer than cannabis, and until we break that barrier and allow interstate commerce to take over and international commerce to come in, I think then we can maybe hopefully rely on some safe cannabis and affordable access. But right now, I am abstaining from cannabis here in Louisiana, and I'm working to get the medical cannabis program, add home grow to the medical cannabis program here. We can get the cost down from $500 an ounce to maybe $60 an ounce growing it at home. Not everybody's going to grow it at home, but the ones that do, at least they'll be able to save some money. So I definitely am not going to the streets because, like I said, when you got a mouth like mine, and I just don't care what I have to say about the illicit market and the people that run it. Doesn't really bother me. I'm outspoken, and when you're outspoken like that, you get ready. Somebody gonna put some Drano or something in your cannabis. So I just stay away from it. It's better off for my health.
Well, that's the reality of coming out sometimes, is exposing yourself and pissing off the locals. Councilmember Armstrong.
All right, so I actually think I might be the local authority on this subject. Am I coming through? Can you? Yeah, okay, good. So I'd like to start by saying something Michael touched on for sure. There's a big problem with counterfeits. I can easily get products on the traditional market that are counterfeited in the California labeling. And you can order them by the thousands, the packaging by the thousands. So if you get edibles that say they're California medicinally tested and all that shit, they're probably not, because it's just anybody can buy that packaging that says, that looks like the, very similar to the product that's on the regular market, sell it as that, and it's not. And especially with concentrates, like in the vape pen, there's a real problem on that. But I would like to reel a little bit back on the reefer madness and speak to our traditional market as far as what it has been for the last 50 years. With New York getting its legalization last year, I attended the 25th Cannabis Cup, which it was 20. So that was the 25th year that local growers in New York have been coming together and judging each other's cannabis each fall. There's that market has been free of contaminants for the most part, if you find reliable people in that space. I grew up just like Michael's talking about on the Mexican brickweed that everybody remembers, that was shipped however up from Mexico. And if it tasted like dirt, like AT had said, if it tasted like dirt, that's what you smoked that week. That's what we had. You didn't have a lot of choice. But now, when I was given the choice to participate in the program, and
We had a minor freezing issue there. Try again, council member. Yeah,
how about without the video?
there you go. Go ahead.
Okay, so I became patient day one in the Pennsylvania program and did everything I could to get the program off the ground. And as soon as the dispensaries had product, I began purchasing from the dispensary, and we started with only concentrates. So for 8 months, I could only purchase concentrates at the dispensary. My primary way of medicating is flower. Okay. After doing that for 2 years, after they had flower, I was literally spending like Tony said of people in Louisiana, I was spending $1,000 a month. So my yearly bill was over $12,000 the first 2 years. I spent $25,000 to be on the medical program, and it couldn't work anymore. I'm disabled. I'm on a fixed income. I went through a divorce in that time. It's just not feasible for me to buy the medicine, all my medicine from the dispensary at that time, because they wanted $500 an ounce. Now, like Michael said, if you smoke 1 gram, it's a pretty easy way. There's 28 grams in an ounce. If you smoke 1 gram a day, that's about an ounce a month. That means you only get to smoke one gram a day, and you're using it as medicine, but that's a good base to start off on. So for me, if that was the only thing I was using in my program, that means my base price was $440 to $520 a month just to have 1 joint of flower a day. It's easy to get up to $1,000 a month if the medicine you like is top shelf medicine. So it's the $520 to start with, and you use edibles daily. So, hey, guess what? That price is going to easily be doubled if you want to take 20 milligrams of THC a day, because my program doesn't have edibles, but they allow you to buy the flower from the program, make your own edibles. Ridiculously expensive, with something that could have been made for distillate. But I don't want to dwell on that too much. What I wanted to say about it's important for people to understand how the traditional market worked for so long. There's no magic to it. People bought cannabis in very large quantities, and as they went down, everybody in the line makes a little bit of money right to the last guy on the street corner. Right. That's how that system works. It's a pretty simple system, and it produces to this day still quality product, if you know where to go for it. And in my experience, the more you buy having said that, the more you buy on the traditional market, that's how you get a discount. So if you buy an eighth on the traditional market, or you buy it from a dime bag from the guy on the corner, you're going to be paying top price. Whereas if you get a little further up in the food chain and you're buying it an ounce or a quarter pound at a time, then that price is going to go down. And it's pretty simple economics. And that's how that system has sustained itself. And that's how that system will allow it to fight a medical program, that in the situation that I'm in now. So all that being said, what I'm basically forced to do to have what I feel is enough medicine to get me through is I refuse to use traditional market carts and concentrates because there's too much of a chance to be bad and to have contaminants. So I insist on all of those products being tested. But when it comes to flower, I try to buy in bulk from reliable people that I know in the traditional market, and that is the way that I'm able to afford, say 2 ounces a month instead of the 1 ounce a month, which is much closer to what I consume, and easily fit it into my program. So just as a reference, I would say I wouldn't pay more than 150 for an ounce, what you would call mid-range, what we started this conversation on right now. But I know on the streets, you pay $100 for a quarter for the same stuff. So that is what it is. In my experience on the last thing I'll say is that my experience during the COVID-19 pandemic was on the East Coast that the traditional market prices went up came very close to dispensary prices during the pandemic. So I believe that what Michael said is probably true, that they're fairly close in a lot of ways. The article that ATN was referring to by the Oxford group, that was from 2020, but all that information is taken from a national database that you can get up to date. They have average price for cannabis in cities and states nationwide, and they've been doing that for years. So that's available to everybody. Just wanted to pass that on. And that's all I got.
Thank you, council member. Appreciate that. Go on. We have a follow-up with council member Crowitz, and then we're going on to Pearson.
Thank you, Etienne. I wanted to touch base on this concept of the I guess the pusher versus the dealer concept. I remember the old Steppenwolf song, the dealer is your friend for nickel or dime, he'll sell you a good time, but the pusher man, they're looking to steal your soul. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's a good song for those that want to look it up. I remember Deborah Small. I'm sure you remember Deborah Small, Etienne, the leader of Breaking the Chains, one of my favorite mentors. And we were talking about stuff, and I did just like I did before. I talk about, cannabis distribution and markets. I talk about the elephant in the room, right? I talk about the biggest percentage, basically, that I am looking at to try to tell the biggest part of the story, which is about prohibition in the end. But we're just looking right at each other, and she's like, no, that's not the dealer. The dealer is like my friend. The dealer is part of my community. The dealer, and she's right. We're both right. I actually gave a speech at a Unitarian Universalist National Convention years ago. The title of my speech was "Bless My Local Cannabis Dealer," and I talked to them about how up until 1996, or not that even that long ago, for many of us, we were only able to get cannabis to fulfill our medicinal needs and whatever from a dealer, from someone who is willing to risk the law, risk going to jail, going to prison for what they're doing. And the vast majority of that cannabis is grown within a few miles of where it's consumed. And I can say quite boldly that I haven't smoked any of the cannabis that's coming in a big truck from Mexico since the 80s. It's an alternative reality for a lot of people. I mean, these are dueling realities. These are things that exist in different planes of existence. based on where you live, based on your economic strata, even based on your color of your skin, you know, that these things can cordon you off into different experiences with regard to access to these substances. It's a nod and a wink, special handshake, room in the back of a party that only a few people that know the owner of the house get to go to. That's our world for the last, you know, 50 years.
Yeah, that's a reality that I cut my teeth on, and where we used to sit around and smoke joints and imagine places where we could actually go visit that would actually sell cannabis in stores, and we would have options, and we would all sit around and laugh hysterically like it was some far off dystopian future that we would never accomplish. And you know, within a few decades, those would become not only realities, but realities we would risk our freedoms for, so that we could actually uh, live that existence and show others that that existence could be lived. So going over to Council Member Pearson. You wanted to respond on this before we move on?
Yeah, yeah, just a point that Michael first made and George followed up on with the cartridges. I had purchased a California cartridge with one of our from a what looked to be legitimate you know, packaging and all that. And I mean, it was so on point. It tasted wonderful. But one of our fellow council members here, he's not on, so I'm not going to mention the verification there, but it turned out to be a bogus cartridge, and it was you know, very fortunately for me, I didn't get sick from it or anything, but it was it was a great counterfeit for the actual brand, and that's I just wanted to throw that out there, that I did get lucky that there wasn't something wild in it.
Yeah, and that's one reason why I'm still very proud to be a pioneer in testing, because I was providing 2 patients, and one day I got an upper respiratory infection, and that made me realize that what I thought I knew, I did not know, and therefore the only place to go was to science. And they're like, "No, Etienne, you can't go to science because they're not going to touch you in cannabis." And they were right. I just had to go for a lot of searching, find the right people, the right scientists, and it all just started from an inquiry and finding experts, and Ethan Russo and others trying to find the standards, and then finding out the standards I could not access or didn't exist, or that where they did exist, Dr. El Soli in the University of Mississippi was not going to give me the codes and the keys. So we had to reinvent the wheel on testing. So that's a reality that traditional cannabis market has never really had to deal with. And I've seen also, even in the Dutch market, where certain sellers will actually test one batch of cannabis, but then put that testing on every single batch that somehow comes out. It's the magical same numbers, even though it's different batches and numbers, because, you know, the realities are it costs a lot of money to do testing of cannabis. And in places like Alaska, they have to fly their samples, which costs on average of $700 a flight. You know, so you better stack up on your samples so that you can get that done and tested. I don't know if that's.
Yep. It's the testings. I mean, it could cost for us to go down to Cannabis here. Just the testing alone for a full panel is something upwards of $300-400 for a 5-pound batch. So like that's what the batches are, and as much as you can here in Alaska. Sorry to cut you off, Etienne.
No. I thank you for chiming in there, because I mean that's an existing reality where a few years ago you couldn't even have cartridges in Alaska. Those were illegal. I had to bring my own when I visited originally, whereas now you can actually purchase cartridges in dispensaries legally. So that's just what's happened in the past couple years. However, Mike touched on a real point, is that there are unscrupulous people in the traditional market that will put a filler in anything. And seeing the actual first deaths from cannabis being around the Ebola situation that transpired right before COVID, which unfortunately took that discussion off of our plates, because we got all consumed about this world pandemic all of a sudden. However, it still is a reality that a lot of people deal. And when I visited a friend of mine over the summer, I saw and tasted his cart that he got there, and it tasted like sulfur. So I knew automatically, because sulfur binds to the crystals and stays with the plant, that it's hard to sell. However, they can still run it through a extraction system and pull it out. However, the flavor never goes away. So I immediately kind of took the stance that George has, and have only decided to use concentrates that come from either legal markets or directly from people I know who are actually making and manufacturing these. So those are key points and components that we haven't thought or dealt with. Brian, did you have something to add, or before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, just one thing, Tony did a nice job of talking about it in terms of, the illicit market and the legal market. That's probably my biggest fear, is you don't know what you put in your body. So one thing, rest assured that when you are buying something from a legal dispensary, the thing has been through a third party state testing, you know what's going inside you. We have a huge issue, especially down here in like SoCal. I'm sure Etienne feels it up in the north, and in Arizona and so on and so forth. There is, the rat line is very clear. It's China, Mexico, up to us with all the fentanyl. And you just talk to people who are dealing with that, and it's an absolute nightmare. So, I know you're paying more, but rest assured you're going to get high and you're going to wake up the next morning feeling great, versus some of the other alternatives out there. So I know it's a little bit heavier of a tax to pay, no kidding, but that's just one of my biggest concerns.
No, safety and efficacy is a reality. And one of the things that we all got into this to do was to help patients. And the last thing that we want to do is provide any more harm, which unfortunately the traditional market is rife with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And as we know, people have died from people's choices and mistakes. So yeah. Welcome, Wade. Well, come over to you. I know you have a lot of experience more in the donation model, as you state, as opposed to we're talking the traditional market and what the costs are, or what people are expected to pay. I know that back in my day, we used to always keep an eye on the latest high times issues that would come out, because they had the HTMQ or whatever it was called, which was a page that broke down what cannabis cost, anywhere from an eighth to a quarter pound or to a kilo even, and what those qualities of cannabis are. So welcome, Council Member Laughter. How are you today?
Thank you, Etienne. I'm good. My apologies for being late, but I had visit with my oncologist, and got to introduce to the infusion center at the local hospital today. And it was all really good news, actually, but it went a lot longer than I expected. So I'm late to join the meeting this afternoon. There's my excuse, if you will. but it's, like I said, all good news there today. Cancer seems to be showing no sign of activity in my body. So it's a matter now of healing the bones. And yeah, that's really good news. And yeah, the traditional market, I mean, what's true is, especially if you're able to grow outdoors, the real costs are so minimal, especially back in the day, that a significant portion of the work that I did was we made it into oils and then made products from that and gave it away. Um, and I remember back at one point I was working with a group to produce a product, and we were trying to sort out, as we scaled up, what could we offer to traditional farmers in the way of price for material and still make a living at our product and price point. And the best that we could do for a total top shelf flower in those days was 600 a pound for making into oils. I think flour, trimmed flour in those days was good. Outdoor was going for 2,000, 2,500. And nowadays, what's that?
That's a pound. I'm just clarifying for those.
Oh yeah, sorry. And today, my goodness, at least in California, and I imagine it's not unlike this in Oregon. Yeah, prices are a fifth of that, couple $100 a pound, and less than that if you're making fresh frozen or. And again, back to my model, there was so much gravy back in the day that it was easy to devote a significant portion of what I was doing to folks who, after a consultation, if we had a product that would work for them, they got it for free. And if they wanted to make a donation for the consultation and or the product, then we accepted that. And that was usually enough to cover the cost of alcohol for extractions, for example. I remember at one point, our bookkeeper, over the 3 years between 2016 and 2019, we collected not quite $6,000 in donations over those 3 years. So what's true is I've heard the observation from informed folks that if you eliminated the taxes and the accountants and the lawyers and the permit fees and all of the rest of it that's involved in the legal market, cannabis flowers shouldn't be much more expensive than what cut flowers in a grocery store are, which is pretty cheap, because the actual cost of growing outdoors is so minimal. When you start trying to do indoor, that's a whole nother conversation. Your costs of production go up significantly. And if you start scaling up, doing large production, again, your costs go up. And I think, again, here in California at the moment, we're suffering from a pretty large overabundance of cannabis. Way too much of it is of mediocre quality. At least that's what I've seen, what little of it I've seen. And the folks who are trying to do really top shelf stuff, they're hard to find. And when you do find them, their product tends to go away quick because it's hard to scale quality. It can be done. And I know there are some concentrate makers that are doing good work. But yeah, in terms of price points in the legal market, I'm not really up on it in terms of specific numbers. I just know that all of the people that I know in the traditional market, one of the things they talk about whenever I talk with them recently is, do I know anybody that wants cannabis at any price, anybody that's buying? And some of these folks are really good at what they do. And they're used to being able to, they have had standing orders for years, and all of a sudden there's nothing going on. And I gotta say, to Mr. Buckley's observation, one of the benefits of the legal market, at least in California, and as it unfolds in other states, one of the benefits is if you know you're in a legal dispensary, the product you're going to get is going to be, it's going to be all tested. It'll be free of contaminants. It'll be what it says it is on the label. Will the testing results, to your observation, Etienne, about testing results for one batch being used to represent another batch, I'm sure that happens in some dispensaries. I'm fortunate enough to have a really good dispensary locally here. They're working with us on the donation program we set up here in Nevada County. They are the source for all the product that once it's handed to the customer. And yeah, all of that product goes at no cost to that consumer. All they have to have is a recommendation from their physician and a state card. And yeah, they get their product at no cost. And we've got a pretty good assortment of product going, and growing interest in the local community of adding to that product line. So that's a project I've been pretty focused on for a couple of years now, still trying to scale it up. But yeah, the beauty of the legal market is you actually, you know, your cannabis is going to be free of Eagle 25 or Eagle 20, I think it's called, which used to be quite an issue because it was so good at controlling powdery mildew. And anyway, you know, on this last question in there about would you grow your own or could you grow your own? I definitely encourage people to grow their own. I've recently put out some seeds in conjunction with Humboldt Seed Company of things that I've been working with for a few years that I think there's a lot of potentially beautiful plants in those seeds. And yeah, if you can grow outdoors, that's the real question. If you can grow outdoors or even in some sort of a greenhouse or structure to protect your plants so that you can go full season, it's an easy plant to grow, especially if you're not trying to do large scale. You can give individual attention to plants, and particularly if you're working in living soil, you can, you know, for years, the only inputs the plants on this farm got was water, because we built up their soil in such a way that they could get what they needed from that. And if you have to go indoors, again, it's, to me, indoor cultivation is, if you don't do it professionally, is actually a threat to health and human safety, because you got water and high voltage electricity in the same room. And if you don't know what you're doing with the electricity and you get water mixed up with it, you can kill yourself, or certainly get a nasty shock. And I know from experience, despite hiring the first 15 years I worked with cannabis, it was all indoors. And started off with a pretty small operation, ended up in a warehouse. And yeah, more than once in that scaling up process, there were several steps involved. And yeah, I learned the importance of doing it right the first time. And that's a cost. That's a built-in cost to set up a production facility to do indoor work. And then meantime, like here in California, if I was obeying the local law as well as state law, I would be allowed to have my 6 personal use plants, but only indoors. And growing 6 plants indoors is a waste of time and space and electricity. It's just not worth doing. The biggest indoor plants I ever got were between 3 and 4 ounces per plant. And you can get pretty easily 3 to 4 pounds off of one plant outdoors at 1/10 the cost, if that. And that's including like allowing something for your land payment and your property taxes and whatnot. Because yeah, when you start buying 6 months of electricity and climate control and the build out to do an indoor facility, yeah. And I think I remember, this is San Francisco real estate prices, you know, a couple bucks a square foot. and California electricity prices, which I think after a certain amount were running 30 some cents a kilowatt hour back in 2004, 2008, 2010 in there. Yeah, we had to get 2,000 a pound for our product indoors at a minimum to break even on costs. And that was with a volunteer crew of trimmers. That wasn't paying trimmers high freight. They, in exchange for trimming, they got product. And but we still had to cover the lease on the warehouse and the electrical bill, and it was nice when we could pay some of the staff something, you know, to cover their costs. So yeah, that's what I got to say about that. Again, my apologies for joining late, but it's really good to be here.
It's always a pleasure to have you, sir, and thank you for your insight as well as what you do and how you go about doing it. Needless to say, yeah, you bring up some very real points, especially with electricity and water and the realities that come with growing indoors compared to outdoors. Going to Councilmember Crowitz for follow-up, and then to Pearson.
Thank you, Tim. I wanted to talk about some of the work that I'm doing on cannabis appellations. I'm a board member of the Origins Council in California, written in a Prop 64. We had the beginnings of what is now rolling out soon of the very first in the world cannabis appellations. And what that is cannabis that's specific to a certain geographical region. You can look at it like heirloom tomatoes, or what our friend Robert Connor Clark would call land race varietals. And you know, there are places around the world where cannabis that you grow in the dirt under the sun in those places can produce outcomes that will be different. That's the whole principle of like champagne or Roquefort cheese, if you follow the French origins of basically a colonial concept of appellations that we are adopting and using in a productive and hopefully constructive way to deconstruct colonialism. And I think it really weighs in on price in an important way, because I have this sort of sketch in my mind of how this all fits together. So just in very short, as many shorter words as I can put it, I see the future pretty clearly where we're going to have a variety of different sources of cannabis, ranging, you know, kind of like the way we have beer or wine today, you know, where you might go to the grocery store for wine, but you might also have a niche store that has very high-end wine. You might even be part of a club that even has more high-end, more expensive, more selective wine. That's the world that we're aiming for. And we're certainly going to have cannabis that's, you know, grown in Colombia or wherever that is at scale, you know, massive amounts of cannabis for, you know, the sort of the Budweiser of cannabis. But what I even see for those that have been looking and following some of the crazy research, there's very great potential that in the not very distant future, many of the products that we get, like vape pens and things like that, will be produced without even producing plant material. They'll produce the cannabinoids from yeast in a tray in a laboratory setting for an unbelievably cheap price. So you won't even be growing the cannabis for some of the cannabis products that would be widely used out in the marketplace. And what I see is the cannabis that I love, you know, which is really a niche. It's not widely available. It never really was. The Hawaiian rainbow I was talking about, or the Colombian gold, or the Cambodian red, or Panama red, etc. We had some really great cannabis that I knew of and actually got to sample back in the 70s, and Gainesville green, and many cannabis varieties and plant materials that come out of Northern California, even to this day, beleaguered and embattled as they are under legalization. Some still survive, and I'm hoping many will survive around the world, and they will hold sort of a niche market. The massive bulk of the market will be in bigger grows. Some of that massive market may even go to synthetics. And then on the edges and the margins, the craft, the fine wine of cannabis will, you know, have a world market that is not so insignificant. but I don't see it as the major marketplace that will exist at that time. And I don't think it needs to be. And I think that indigenous peoples, traditional healers, people that have been working with this plant forever will be able to benefit from their knowledge. And one last little thing about this appellations of origin, just to really hit home for you. Let's say you're trying to treat cancer, you're experimenting with things, you're using massive amounts of cannabis extract. Wouldn't it be nice if you can source that from a place where you know geographically that there aren't that many heavy metals in the soil? So that before they even do the first test, you know that geographically that cannabis product is going to be safer for you. So that's a kind of a last thought to put in the memory hopper on that.
Thank you, Councilmember Pearson.
Well, I just wanted to chime in there with one comment first, and then we just went in all types of good ways there. So first off, three-phase electric and water is no joke. Wade, I completely agree with you there. Another thing, the manipulation of testing is something that I can't speak on, like experiencing it, but I've heard of outfits injecting oils into their test samples to up the THC content. And like I said, I can't speak on that with any type of scientific research done prior to it, but I've heard that in the beginnings of the Alaska market being introduced legally. I can't believe that electric was more in California than it is in Alaska. It's 24, 22 right now percent of kilowatt hour. But I think what Michael was saying, just to go off of what Michael was saying with the appellations of origins, I mean that is something I know I've heard you speak of it, or I've heard of the project that you're doing, but it just blew my mind because I've been looking back into peonies production here. So peonies is a very specific, expensive flower to purchase on the market, and it is very specifically grown in Arctic areas like my own. But yeah, Matanuska Thunderfuck, I'm not sure if it was ever done outdoors, but hopefully that's something that I could suggest to some of my cultivation friends that are nervous about federal legalization, so that we have a couple strains up here that are specific to Alaska that could keep some of the doors open from these people that have been working in the legal market backbreaking hours and just stressed beyond belief after fighting for this. And I'm really glad that you're doing that, Michael. Thanks, Etienne. And thanks, Wade. You're looking great.
Right on. Which leads us to our next discussion, which is, what effect has the legal market had on the traditional market? Well, I know for one, through what we did medically originally in Northern California, since Northern California used to produce 80% of the United States cannabis traditionally back in the day. And we drove the prices down by demanding quality, and that was by having an example by either stuff that I grew or others grew on hand at or better the quality that they were coming in, because back then everybody wanted $4,000 to $6,000 a pound for their cannabis, and we had to justify that. So by having a high quality pound that I paid $2,300 for, that I could say, hey, I got this for $2,300. You can't do this, then leave. And enough of that gave people the idea that they had to change their prices, and over time the prices have come down. However, we've also seen legal markets start up, and then we see a big problem happening in the traditional market is counterfeits, which we really haven't talked about, which is a big problem for manufacturers, especially here in California. Within 24 hours of your new product actually put on the market, there is an alley in Los Angeles that you can actually go purchase every part of the packaging, from the cartridge all the way to the labeling that goes on it. So I think that is one way that the legal market has had and created products. I know Stizzy, Cookies, and others all struggle with knockoffs, and especially the traditional market. I get marketing every day on Twitter, Instagram, offering to sell me, fully packaged products that look absolutely identical to what I would purchase in my dispensary, but to you for much cheaper because, again, they're not tested, they're not safe, they're in the same packaging. So the traditional market has felt the need to step up their marketing game. As to when I started in the early 90s, it was just me and a baggie, and I better have some other baggies to split this into. Whereas today you have to have full on labeling. If you're legal, there's a whole swath of legal requirements that have to fit on every box that I receive in my dispensary. And I have to look for and toward those situations. So the reality of counterfeiting, I think, is something that has been a recent phenomena due to legalization or medicalization in certain states, because either people hear rumor or people have tried because people shared or they saw. And I have never seen more professional packaged cannabis products in my life than what is available on the traditional market nowadays. So who would like to speak to next on the influence that the legal market has had on the traditional market? Anybody?
Yeah, I'll throw up with that one.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's part of because here, at least here in California, I'll say it like this: at the local level, we have a few permitted farms in Nevada County, but we have hundreds, if not thousands, of farms, folks who are doing cannabis at some sort of scale, but are not permitted or licensed to do so. And part of what's going on is local law enforcement has said, hey, it's not our problem. It's a code problem. It's a nuisance, like a barking dog. But they're starting to sort out how to change that. And I know one of the things that's on the table is a bill in the assembly, I think, that would make it a felony, again, to have more than 6 plants if you've got personal use going. And again, it's so, well, it won't work. Obviously, the last thing we need is another law to put more people in jail for a plant. But I think part of what's happened is because it's not really criminal act anymore, it's part of why the price of cannabis has collapsed. It's not collapsed just in the legal market, it's collapsed in the free market as well. I know a lot of people who have done this work for years that are like, they've gone bigger and bigger each year because this was supposed to be the last year that they could do it. And meantime, they kept getting bigger and bigger and selling their product for less and less. And now they're not able to sell it. It's not worth finding a broker who wants $100 because you could get another 100 and you've got to trim it. And how the hell do the numbers just don't work. And I'm glad to hear at least rumors of a price somewhat recovering in the legal market for at least good quality material. That's what I'm hearing from a couple of the local distributors, because it's been a real heartbreak for me, all the effort that we've put into trying to set up the California marketplace so it actually works. and how badly it is working for most of the people who are in it. There's some who are doing well, but I know a lot of folks who are not doing that well despite doing good work. And there's a bunch of reasons for it, but there we are. But meantime, yeah, I think the free market or traditional market really suffers from gross abundance, just like we do. And part of why they have so much material is there's no real consequences for most of them for growing as much as they want. Law enforcement here in Nevada County, I think last year they did 4 publicized anyway, abatement actions. And there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of free market gardens at scale in this county. And they took down 4 of them. So, you know, in terms of consequences, you don't have to pay taxes. You don't have to pay accountants and lawyers and all the rest of it that all the permitted farmers are having to do. So there's a back and forth effect there. One of the things that I think is good about it all is it is normalizing the plant. I'm hoping that within my lifetime, maybe, cannabis will be a plant that all over the world people can grow it. It's not there's no stigma to it anymore. It truly is a plant that does no harm. When you start making crazy concentrated versions of it and or synthetic versions of it, you've got a whole different conversation in my experience. But the plant itself, yeah, especially outdoors, there's no threat, no danger. She's just a beautiful plant, and it's a lot of fun to grow her. Oh, yeah, sounding like an old hippie here. There you go.
Well, there you go, old hippie. No, it's all good. We're going over to Councilmember Armstrong.
Okay, so want to look at this from a couple of different perspectives. I think as a patient, you need to look at in Pennsylvania, we've had 650,000 people sign up for our program since 2016, but we currently only have like 360,000 active patients, and a large number of those entered the program for a year, found it to be too expensive, and returned to the traditional market. I think that's something that can't be ignored. And so that brings me to what my opinion on this was. I think I've stated it to other council members along the way, is that even if we got federal legalization, it's going to take a long time, if ever, to get rid of the traditional market, because it's such a strong market, and it's as Wade said, it's such an easy plant, easy thing to do. It's much less dangerous than, say, going in the woods and making moonshine, where there's a big chance of explosions and that kind of stuff. Dropping a seed in the ground, not real dangerous. So I think the traditional market will always be there. And then I think the definitely patients are going to fall back to it if the taxes become too extraordinary on the legal market, then people will find a way to make it affordable. And then I think the other thing that we should look at is the effects of states, of the way that prohibition is kind of bent but not broken. Here in the Northeast, Maine produces an immense amount of cannabis. And I'm sure that it's not all consumed in Maine, but they have the best laws to produce cannabis here in the Northeast. But as I sit in Pennsylvania, New York has legalization already. And so we will basically be surrounded by legalization in the next few years. And I think that affects how we look at traditional market versus versus the legal market, because the legal market is certainly affected by that. And as we see, like them trying to now get legalization, and they want adult use in Pennsylvania because we have adult use in New York and such a long border with New York. They don't want people going over there to buy their cannabis. So yeah, I think primarily my observation on is that they are intertwined, and that the prices reacted to each other in the first test of the market. I would say during the COVID thing, I think they come to each other. And I think my other second point would be that the traditional market is going to probably be here forever, because it's a plant and the government has forced us to learn how to use how to grow it ourselves for 40, 50 years. And people that did that, like Wade, are going to have a really hard time going to a dispensary and giving somebody $550 for an ounce of quality medicine. That's all I have.
Well, in time, the price won't be that. In time, the price, because if once legalization and everybody's growing, and when I always talk about that notorious Costco ounce, it's not even going to be worth the traditional market to grow eventually, because the costs industrially, or as Micah was saying, because of what they're going to be producing via test tubes and science, because now science is actually playing with this on a whole other level, which we've seen a whole new flourishment from edibles to drinks to different absorption methods and methodologies that are coming forward. So there's a lot to look forward to. And I think, yes, their traditional market's going to be still around for a while, but I think eventually it's just going to get priced out of reality. Eventually it's just will be cheaper to actually go to the store and buy it than it is to physically grow it. Whereas there will always be craft people growing it, just like there are people who craft grow roses, etc. So that's why we're fighting for the ability to grow, because it's a wonderful and beautiful thing. Council Member Crowitz.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, I kept rewriting the question in my head, but I'll let you determine what the question should be written like after I give my answer. How about that? The notion of what is like the traditional use, or the traditional sales or whatever of cannabis, is the part that I have the issue in my brain with. There's a lot of stuff that we've seen, members of our council here and those who have been working with the artifacts and the history of cannabis, that the world hasn't seen yet. The stuff hasn't been broadly published yet. It's a very small world that maybe is following all the auctions that are happening on the line, and maybe see some of the stuff as it's coming down the pike. But there is a massive amount of historical artifacts that people like Ben Dronkers, if you've been over to the museum in Amsterdam or his museum in Barcelona, you've gotten a taste of just the absolute mind-blowing history of cannabis, because cannabis was so important to humans as we've gone through our life over centuries and eons. You can look at the cannabis history as almost like a lens into human history and tell almost the entirety of it. So anyway, back in the day, back in the United States, when we very first got started with medical marijuana, like around 1850, we were, and all the way into 1900, because we were still experimenting with it. We still hadn't figured out how to grow good cannabis here in the United States yet. It was all basically imported. We were getting our cannabis from Africa, and like half of it basically from Africa, half of it from India. Cannabis indica, Cannabis africanus. The cannabis in the United States, Cannabis americana, was for shit. And then around 1900, Park Davis and Eli Lilly, two of the major pharmaceutical companies of the day, went over to India, actually studied how to grow cannabis, came back here, did a test crop and figured it out, and interestingly, they didn't know what the active ingredient was. They had this really strong cannabis extract that was red in color. It was cannabinol. They called it cannabinol, red extract. And they were sure that the active ingredient was in there, so they just called the active ingredient cannabinol. They, because they didn't know what the active ingredient was, tested it on dogs. And if they saw the effect that they were looking for on the dog, then they knew it was active, and then they'd sell it to the public as pharmaceutically active. But anyway, they finally found cannabis americana that was active, and were producing it. And the reason why I say all this is because this cannabis africanus, this cannabis indica, was still sourced basically from the same people that have been growing it for eons. That's what we need to get back to. That's what we need to like reconnect to, is, you know, before colonialism, before we uprooted this stuff and literally destroyed it and the cultures around it, from, you know, the drug war. That's the, you know, sort of this essence of this plant, that we can put it back into the pharmaceutical sector. As far as the cannabis plant for the benefit of humans, oh my God, the history is so far and wide, and it's going to be unique to each place around the world. The legal market is only killing what the illegal market was created by the drug war. I mean, this is, I look at it as sort of the transition period, you know, that we're going to have to go through. One of a couple, probably. Bless you, Etienne.
Thank you, sir. Little snowsies. Going over to Councilmember Landry.
Yeah, just to follow up with what Michael was saying, you know, we've been going like, what, 5 decades, for real, since the 70s for sure, with this war, you know, war on drugs. And it's easy to advocate to me, because if you were going up against a government that would had actually had success in mass incarcerating people using cannabis and all, if they were lowering the opiate overdoses and lowering the drugs that come into the country, and, you know, if they were actually successful in anything that they were doing with the drug war, it'd be hard to say, hey, let's have some legal cannabis, you know. But they're not, you know. The opiate overdose in Lafayette, Louisiana, here where I'm at, it's gone up 300% just since Louisiana's medical cannabis law came into effect. So, you know, that's not success. Success would be seeing those numbers fall, you know, seeing the seizures at the border go down, seeing more business, legal businesses, successful family-run businesses operating, you know. That's success. And so at some point, I envision, like some of you stated earlier, some point we got to look at, you know, at harm reduction, and you know, is it going to be a better idea to maybe go after, if somebody's got some cannabis, that even the legal dispensaries, if they're putting out cannabis that's not tested right, or if they fudging the numbers on the testing, you go after them for that, you know. But and the, you know, the illicit market or underground traditional market, if it's not hurting anybody, you know, that do no harm, you know, don't go after them for having the cannabis. Just if they're putting out some cannabis, and you have to have some mechanism where you can have it, citizens can have the cannabis tested, you know, to where you can know if it's bad or not. But I don't think 30, 50 years of mass incarceration, Louisiana leads the world in incarceration down here. With 4.5 million people, we imprison more people than any country in the world. And most of it's from, you know, small time drug users, you know, just with some residue on a pipe, or even, you know, the amount of a size of pack of sugar. If you have that much of anything, drug, you could get sentenced to life. There's been people sentenced to life in prison down here for cannabis, for 2 or 3 joints of marijuana, cannabis. That stuff's not working anymore. It's just not working. It's causing a lot more damage to our society, and we have to just keep. If you're listening out there, get involved. Email, just one email. One email can change the world. You gotta get engaged and say, hey, I want a part of this. I want to make things better, and it's going to change, but we have to get more people involved. Thank you.
Al, Councilmember Byrne.
Should have taken notes. I agree with a lot of the comments, especially that the present cannabis supply chain that's done locally, basically, at least where I live, will remain. However, I think I disagree with almost all of you about what the future is going to be. Medical cannabis will become a niche in the cannabis world. It'll be a niche. It'll be a necessary niche. I think that true cannabis patients, somebody that really is really sick, 4th stage lung cancer or something, you'll see that Western medicine will soon incorporate those kind of cannabis treatments in with their regular protocols. So there'll always be a medical cannabis niche. But the plant, I got to keep telling you guys, is a fucking plant. And I really don't think you guys got it. This plant's power, its money in the capitalistic world is not in the medical cannabis arena. It's just not. It's in the seed, the stems, the oil, and especially in the nutrition of this plant. And the market in the future that will make the money and will change the whole conception of what you guys are moralizing about. I'm not knocking your moralization, but that time's over. The time ahead is what are the capitalists going to do? Because whether you like it or not, you live in a capitalistic society and you might as well be a fucking capitalist. And the capitalists are going to turn this thing into a food, because damn, if there's one thing in this world we need a lot of, it's a good, rich food. And those seeds are the best fucking food in the world. Now, just to take you back in time, I produced a book in 1997 called Cannabis in Medical Practice. But in that document, that book, which is still available, by the way, just it's historical because what we did, 13 authors, 17 chapters. And there were 2 chapters in there that elicited the most interest right away. There was a chapter written on the nutrition. It was a study done by a lawyer named Donnie Wirtschafter for us. Donnie got paid for it, got it, we published it, and it shows how the cannabis seed contains the most nutritious combination of acids for human beings on earth. The other thing we did was we had 2 wonderful guys, friends of mine, Dave Pate and Rob Clark, write a chapter on what will hemp do? What's hemp gonna mean to us in the future? These guys, if you don't know who they are, they know. And basically that's what they said. This was in 1997 in that book, that we're going to get to a point where medical cannabis and legalization become the norm. And some of you guys already live in states where that's true. So what's next? What's next is not going to be some sort of, well, we should grow pot cheaper or something. Let me give you these figures. I don't know if you guys know James Burton. James, Nam vet, infantry, year in Nam, got a Purple Heart, come back, ended up with glaucoma, found out that pot, just like Bob Randall, found out that pot helped glaucoma, grew it, got arrested, busted, criticized, et cetera, et cetera. He said, fuck this place. And he went to the Netherlands. He got over there and grew cannabis. And he became so good at it that the Netherlands, the country, hired him to grow their cannabis, their medical cannabis for their patients. And he did so for years. And here's what he did. Here's what it cost for those years. It cost 0.53 euros per gram for him to grow it. That in dollars is subtract 10%, 50 cents a gram to grow it. Now he was growing indoors because he had to, they required him to. And he sold it to the Netherlands for years, decades, for $2.50 a gram. So this is what you can expect to see financially very soon in the future in the United States for medical cannabis. This is medical grade cannabis grown for a country who required the top-notch stuff, and James gave it to them. These are the figures you're going to have to get used to. But the money in cannabis and the future of cannabis, I repeat, is to insist that people start treating cannabis as a plant, not a drug, because it's a plant. And as who was talking about, they don't pay any attention, the cops don't pay any attention anymore because there's so much hemp going on here. Of course they don't. Of course they don't. They can't tell hemp from cannabis. Yeah, I can if I'm driving by a field of it unless I stop and look. So this is not something that we're ever going to see again, where the police forces in general, or any kind of state police, are going to come looking for cannabis plants. Michael and I have been living under helicopters in Virginia for 30 years. They don't come anymore. The people here in Florida have been living under helicopters for 30 years. They don't come anymore. There's no point in it. And to get back to the point, your future, start looking as veterans, start looking at what we can do to get these guys to think of us, get us to think of this thing as a plant. And rather than have all these complicated legal maneuvers, I've asked this question before. What other plant in the United States grown commercially is controlled by law enforcement? Nothing. Nothing. You know, there's 550,000 drugs available to Tony and Brian and I right here in the United States. We might have to go get a doctor to get some of them, but a lot of them are over the counter. What the hell? 550,000. They're all in a fucking system, except cannabis got its own fucking system. Well, you know, the reason it's got its own fucking system is because it's a plant. It doesn't belong there at all. And if we, I'm an old timer here, but I've had to go through stages where everybody called it marijuana, and we had to get them to understand it was cannabis, and the medical community thought it was cannabis, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm still in this fucking conundrum of why am I still dealing with these fucking senators and this stupid media journalists that keep saying cannabis is a drug? No, it isn't, you scumbag. It's a goddamn herb. It's an herb. The Herbal Society of the Americas said it was in 2014. It's an herb. So and you've heard me, I'm a little toasted right now, but you hear me talk all the time about semantics. It's a plant. And if we can please start to think about the future as a medical plant that has a lot of other uses, that will be the kicker to make this plant as common as it was in 1935 in North Dakota. And I bring that up because I have a picture in my house of a schoolhouse in North Dakota. And it's up on stilts for whatever reason, but it's a schoolhouse. And it's quite large for those days. It's probably 60 by 60. And it is surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of acres, right up to the edge of the building by hemp. And that's the future of this plant. So I know all you guys are interested in medical no more than me, But we also have to, in order to justify our medical position, we also have to teach these people more than they know now. And I'm talking about politicians, the journalists, and a lot of the goddamn advocates and Weed for Warriors guys that we have to deal with. They don't know enough shit either. And I'll take them all on, but we as a V.A.C, we have to come across with, I think, a different idea about the future that might be real. And we don't need to deal in what we did yesterday. That's the way I keep thinking about it. So I see it different than a lot of you, but I hope I've made some conversions.
Thank you, Al. It's always appreciated and good to hear your thoughts. Councilmember Pearson.
Well, Al, I have to agree with you completely. Capitalism is here for capitalists, and I love just playing off of the schoolhouse. I mean, just paper alone and the nutrients that are available within just eating raw flour and stuff like that is something that I think has gone by the wayside because of the way that we've had to address the situation. And I think the patient's avenue is what really got it in and made it look, it brought it back from the if you smoke it, you will kill mindset that the drug war has had on us all. And I think you made some incredible points, and I firmly agree with literally. I did not disagree with anything you said there.
All right, well, moving on to our next question, which is more of a, how to tell between a legal or illegal dispensary. Here in California, they have actually created a code that you can actually scan. So as soon as you come into a dispensary, you can scan and see if it's in the system. The problem is that down in Southern California, there's more illegal dispensaries than there are legal dispensaries that sell legal and counterfeit products. So it's a problem that they are still dealing with due to size and growth and not having proper regulations here. It's definitely an issue that is a reality to move on or towards. And I know that there's also listing agents such as Weed Maps and Leafly that people can look to find access and access points, but even they will list dispensaries that are not legal. So again, that's just, I'm not sure what's happening in other states. I know this is probably more of a regional problem here in California due to, again, not enough regulation in some areas, over-regulation in some dry counties, dry areas, and of course, the draw financially is too robust for people not to take the risks for. I read weekly of busts that are happening and the amount of product and cash that is found on hand is rather staggering. So I understand why people are trying to go the whack-a-mole route. And if the state had opened access to more licenses, etc., I'm not sure that would be reality or not. So that's just to kind of go there. Al, did you want to respond?
Technical question. I'm curious. The patient can come into your dispensary and show an ID card or something, and it registers you as a legitimate dispensary. Cool. Does that also tell you that this is a legitimate patient?
Well, I can see both legitimate patients, and so legitimate patients have the state card, and so the state card gets them not have to pay the tax. So that is a something that you file for as a patient with your local county under Prop 64. It cannot exceed $100. So the law stipulated that cap. So of course, my county immediately caps it at $100, all the way at the max. All of a sudden, regardless, any adult can come in, as well as passports, and of course, it is scanned into the system so that it actually then pops into my employees' area so that they can see the person, etc. And that information is then wiped at midnight, so it is not kept around or kept on premises. So for patients, though, we do have to keep a patient database so that they can keep track of what it is and what they have and what they want to purchase. So again,
Good.
all
Okay.
dependent on
Thank you. I got it.
where you are and what you have going on. Tony, and then Wade.
Yeah, we got three types of dispensaries down here in Louisiana. You got the legal ones. They're on the high traffic areas, you know, at the busiest parts of town. Then you got the home dispensaries on the, you know, the other end of town where it's not so, the quiet one-way street or something. You go to somebody's house. And then you got the mobile micro dispensary where you just jump in the guy's passenger seat and he pulls out his crotch, he pulls out an ounce of cannabis and you buy it from him. That's the three types we have here. And the safest ones are the ones in the busiest parts of town. But unfortunately, you know, if you're on limited income, and the dispensary is an hour away, and say you don't have the money to even fill up the car with gas, you're gonna go to the micro dispensary or the guy's house. You know, that's just economics. And when you do that, you put your health at risk because you don't know what you're getting. If it's been you know, tested. Well, it certainly hadn't been tested, but if it's been adulterated in any way, you know, or pesticide laden and mold, mildew, anything like that, you don't really know. And plus you're at risk of arrest. And in Louisiana, 14 grams or less is $100 fine. Above 14 grams, it's up to 6 months in jail. I think I want to say 500. It might have changed last year to $300 fine, but $300 or five and 6 months in jail, or 6 months in jail. So, you know, even 3 days in jail can change someone, the whole dynamics of their life. You know, you get put in jail, you could, you know, lose your wife, lose your job. Lose your, you know, if you lose your job, you're gonna lose your house. All kind of sorts of things. You know, it's just terrible. It's a terrible situation to be in. You know, if you're say your mother has cancer or something, and you're both on limited income, you're gonna find some cannabis to give to your mom to save her life. And if you can't afford it from going to the dispensary, you're gonna get it any way you can. I know any one of us in this room would do it. Any way we can, we're going to get it. But unfortunately, it's going to be untested, and you're going to risk arrest. So we need to change these laws to where we can have access to cannabis, and psilocybin is right around the corner. Same stories repeating itself. There's millions and millions of dollars being spent on research on psilocybin. It's got profound healing effects on mental health issues, and you know, you can get ready. It'll be the same thing. You'll have to go to some doctor, some pharmacist to get it, and it's going to be out of reach, and people are going to still get arrested on the street for it. And it's non-addictive, so It's anti-addictive. So you take it in 3-4 months, you don't even want to touch it again. But unfortunately, that's the next battle we're gonna have to fight. Psilocybin, it's fast track for FDA approval for mental health, and it's coming just like cannabis.
Thank you, council member. Council member Wade.
Thank you, Chen. And yeah, Tony, your point about economics driving consumer choice is, I think it's true across the board, all the way across the country. And people that are desperate will do what they need to do. I thought Al brought up an interesting point about trying to identify what's a legal or illegal dispensary. If there is a medical program or a adult use program in your state, I know in California it's pretty easy. Etienne pointed to it. There's a database available that lists dispensaries that are legal. One of the problems we have in the California marketplace is a shortage of legal dispensaries. We have one dispensary in Nevada County, and we're surrounded by counties that don't have one. So they're pretty busy and doing well. One of the things that Al pointed out is, yes, you can search to see if the dispensary is legal, but what about the patient? Is there a way to verify the patient thing? And I know in California, they don't keep track of your use or consumption or purchases at the dispensaries. But I know, for example, in Utah, they do. They have, or used to, I don't know that they still do this, but they have a strict medical program, and they have a limit on how much a patient can purchase in a month. And they keep track of your purchases at all of the different dispensaries in the state, so that you can't go shopping around and get more than the amount that's allowed by law. And quite honestly, that amount is pretty low if you are in a situation of true medical need. And I love your point, Al, about we're talking about a plant here. It's not medicine. I think it's really essential to hold the point of view, if you will, that the plant seems to have medical properties. It seems to have healing abilities by awakening our innate ability to heal our own bodies. The endocannabinoid system is a really fascinating field of study, but the whole magic or miracle, if you will, of what cannabis can do, just strictly in the health realm, not talking about all of the other things that hemp or cannabis can do, but just in terms of human health, it's pretty amazing to me. And one of the real tragedies of prohibition is we kept the research from happening. Imagine if our whole lifetimes, the medical establishment, the pharmaceutical community had been devoted to studying this plant and why it has the effects on our bodies and how to find drugs that might supplement or, just all the suffering that would not have had to happen. All the persons who died from epilepsy or cancers of various sorts, or chronic bowel conditions. Don't even get me started. There's lists of things that this plant seems to have effects upon our bodies. And if science had been studying that for the last 80 years instead of trying to prove how bad the plant was, we would probably have a very different relationship to the plant. But it doesn't lend itself to being a medicine, because one of the requirements for a medicine is you have to be able to standardize it. You have to be able to get the same results from most of the people you offer it to. And any of us who have worked with cannabis very much realize that individuals respond differently to the same product. And it's just the way it is. It's not really, it doesn't lend itself to being a medicine. I think of it more as an essential nutrient that is missing from most of our diets. And it's why so many of these conditions that respond favorably to cannabis have become so prevalent in our population. It's why, well, there you go. I'll leave it at that. Sorry for the long-winded rant, but there you go.
Always good to hear you, sir. And you brought some good points. Al, you wanted to respond?
Yeah, here I go again. With all due respect, Wade, cannabis is the most studied plant on the face of the earth. And the science of cannabis, I estimate now, is somewhere in excess of 120,000 peer-reviewed pages. When I left patients at a time, I had amassed something in the order of 105,000 pages, and that was 6 years ago. It's the most studied plant on earth. What you are repeating is what I call copycat journalism here in the United States, and it's been very successful. The government propaganda arm says, we don't do science here. We have all these requirements, University of Mississippi. There's all kinds of fucking shit floating around out there. But it's a world. And out there in the world, right now, there's at least 27 countries that have this stuff in their pharmacopoeia. They didn't put it there without science. Science is out there. What you're talking when you say there's no science and the journalists say that, you've got to call bullshit. You've got to tell them, here's a big word, but it's the word. But what they're referring to is ethnocentric science. Ethno, okay, it comes from the Latin and it means internal. Ethnocentric science. They're fucking right. We don't have enough US science. Correct. But that's ethnocentric science. Do we have enough worldwide science? Absolutely. It's the most scientifically studied plant on the face of the earth. And again, it's a plant. That's why Wade is absolutely correct. Doesn't even met the definition of medicine. That's why I've said all along, it's a fucking plant. Can you make a drug from it? Yes, that's the medicine. You make something from the plant. Just like you make aspirin from fucking tree bark. But aspirin's not a drug. It's a drug. The tree isn't a fucking drug. It's a tree. And this whole misconception that we deal with the press and within our own ranks is counterproductive, in my opinion. So again, another thing, but it's studied. Please don't say that anymore. Please challenge that every fucking time you get. And if you need backup, I'll provide it to you. But it's 2014, the American Herbal Association has said it's an herb. They even produced a monograph. It's the second largest monograph on a plants ever produced in America in human history, second only to garlic. It's a plant, and it's not a weed. It's a plant. It's cannabis. And when the laws get fucking changed, and they fucking will someday, they won't say weed is now legal. So get over that out there too. They will say the cannabis plant is medicine. The cannabis plant will be legal, and it won't be weed or pot or grass or whatever the fuck these assholes guys Johnny come lately's coming in with and making a big deal of. And absolutely with the volume that is being planted and grown in this country, I see it right here in Florida. I've seen it all over the place. As ETN has so well described, this is creating fucking problems. And when we started this shit, him and me and others 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we looked at this and we said, it's going to come to this, where all of a sudden this stuff's going to be legal, and then what's going to happen? Well, this is what's happening, and we just got to sort it all out. It will sort out. It'll have to end up in some sort of, like Michael keeps talking all the time. He keeps saying this shit. We got to regulate this stuff. And he's not meaning we got to keep this from people. It's just we got to regulate this stuff. Just like we regulate how you grow sugar beets. It it has to be controlled. So again, my little lecture, but please, Wade, we got the science, guy. We really do.
I think that was understood. It was more of a jab out of love, Al. I think you went over, but it's all good. With that in mind, so that's going to kind of wrap up our discussion on cannabis economics. As you can see, it's a very complex issue. There's many layers to this onion, and I don't think we've covered them all, but I think that we've done a significant deep dive, and I appreciate everybody coming in tonight and providing their insights and their thoughts and ideas. I'd like to thank council members Tony Landry, Wade Laughter, George Armstrong, Michael Crowitz, Pearson Kennedy Crosby, Brian Buckley, Wade Laughter, Al Byrne, and myself, Etienne Fontaine. I hope we've given you a bit of an understanding of the economics of cannabis and what they are. And this is our medicine. This is what it is. And so this has become our lives. So we understand the intrinsic costs, but I think there's a lot of realities that we brought forth to give you an understanding about what you're looking at, what you're seeing, and why it affects you. So I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight for Veterans Action Council Roundtable number 32. The Bud Burden, Cannabis Economics 101. So you all have a great rest of your night, and we'll talk to you soon.